brings with it a flood of memories for everybody. Some of them full of nostalgia, and others full of wistfulness. We remember names and faces of friends and teachers that we may have forgotten otherwise. We recall experiences of deep learning and discovery, and likely even moments of difficulty and struggle. Dodgeball during gym class. Who thought that was a good idea? Crowded hallways, jammed lockers, forgotten locker combinations. I still have that dream. And cubed beets at lunch. School lunch. As I said before, one of my favorite classes. Does anybody have an all-time favorite school lunch, or maybe an item from a school lunch? Like maybe chocolate pudding? Yeah? Or, yeah. Strawberry milk, that's coming. Strawberry milk in the half-pint cardboard carton. Fish sticks, some people really love the fish sticks. Canned peaches or fruit cocktail, I used to love that. And did any of you have this? We had a rectangular peanut butter fudge square, and we used to roll them up into balls. It was really gross. But they were coveted and prized possessions, especially for trading time during lunch. You could get almost anything for one of those. And of course, rectangular pizza. Yeah, the rectangular school cheese pizza, who could forget that? Pizza was a day for celebration, and knowing that pizza was going to be on the plate later in the day could make a long and tiring morning go just a little bit faster. My favorite lunches when I was in school were the days when I was allowed to pack my lunch. Now, it didn't happen very often, but when it did, I was in heaven. And I packed it in my best lunchbox with Scooby-Doo and the meddling mystery-solving kids and the mystery machine on the front and the awesome matching thermos inside. It would be filled with one of my favorite lunches, maybe ham and cheese, potato chips, a cookie, or a Hostess snack cake if I was really lucky, and maybe some carrot sticks. But my all-time favorite, the one I still pack when I bring my lunch and when I make my lunch right there in the kitchen here at the church, was and is, any guesses? Peanut butter and jelly. Yes, peanut butter and jelly. Creamy Peter Pan peanut butter and Welch's grape jelly, or even better, my grandmother's homemade grape jelly on Wonder Bread, or if I was lucky, on Roman meal, and then a bag full of plain potato chips. There's nothing better than that for me. And true confession, throughout all of COVID, when we were all staying at home, that was my lunch every single day for about a year and a half. And if you think this isn't true, Jennifer and Allison are right back there. You can ask them. When I packed my school lunch, my mom would always say the same thing before I left the house. Brian, you have 2 halves of your sandwich in your lunchbox. If you see someone who doesn't have a lunch or isn't eating, make sure you offer to share your lunch with them. And that sentiment stuck with me. Now, I'm not sure if I ever had the opportunity to actually share what was in my lunchbox, but the philosophy shaped me then and continues to shape me now and the way I see the world. And it's something that we can also see in our gospel lesson this morning from the Gospel of Matthew. This text this morning is commonly referred to as the feeding of the 5,000. And this story is one that most everyone knows and is actually also something that appears in our common cultural consciousness. It's not unusual to hear someone say it was a real loaves and fishes moment when that which they planned for far exceeded what they had, and somehow the resources were stretched for everybody. This story of the miraculous feeding of 5,000 men, besides the women and children, as the author of Matthew says, is the only recorded miracle of Jesus that appears in all 4 Gospels. And that must mean something. This story must have been incredibly important to the life of the early church. It was something that must have shaped the way they understood their life together and the manner in which they engaged the world around them. So let's take a look together at the story, and perhaps we can catch just a glimpse of what they may have seen. According to the author of the Gospel of Matthew, the story begins with Jesus retreating via boat for time alone after hearing of the violent death of his relative John, who prepared the way in the wilderness for Jesus through his preaching, his prophetic utterances, and his baptisms at the Jordan River. The crowds who had been following Jesus heard that Jesus had gone, so they left their towns on foot, it says, in order to follow him. And when Jesus docked his boat, he saw the crowd. He saw the crowd. But more than that, and here is where I think that story truly begins. For the author says Jesus had compassion, or was moved deep inside for those who had gathered, those who had come seeking him. And this compassion is what set the stage, not only for what happens next in this story, but for the entire Jesus narrative throughout the centuries. It is this deep felt compassion for others that witnesses the struggle, the suffering, the challenges that others face, and meets them there to bear the burden with them, and to do everything possible to relieve the pressure, to salve the wound, to feed the hunger. In this story, we are told that, moved with compassion, Jesus healed people throughout the day. Then his disciples, those wonderfully human characters, followers of Jesus, his closest companions, came to Jesus after a long day together and said something like, "Hey, look, all of this, it's great. It's really great, Jesus, but it's getting late. And we're hungry and tired. Oh, and so are the people. So is the crowd, the gathered people. So Jesus, if you could just send them away, that would be really wonderful. And then they could go into the towns and maybe they could buy food for themselves." Perhaps they thought that this was the compassionate thing to do and the prudent thing to do for the crowd and frankly for themselves, or maybe their stomachs were growling loudly and they were beginning to get a bit hangry. But the author tells the readers that Jesus, in a typical Jesus-y move, said this: "They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat." Now, can you imagine the disciples' reaction? What? How are we supposed to do that? All we have is this lunch that we brought to feed ourselves, these 5 fish and these 2 loaves. And then here is where the miracle happens. Jesus asks them to bring the food to him. And he tells the crowd to sit down on the grass. And he blesses the food. And he breaks the bread. And then he gives it back to his disciples in order that they might share the lunch that they had brought to feed themselves with all of those gathered. Now I want to hit pause for a moment, because it's easy to see the miracle that comes next as some kind of David Copperfield or David Blaine or Shin Lim. Tried to cover all the generations for magicians there. It's easy to think of it as some kind of sleight of hand trick or some supernatural intervention that defies the laws of nature, and it could have indeed been the latter. But let's look at it from a different perspective. For what if what really happened there on the grass was that after Jesus asked for the disciples to share their lunch with him, after he blessed the food, after he broke the bread, and after he gave it back to his disciples and asked them now to share their lunch with the people gathered, what if then the hearts of all of those gathered, the innermost part of the more than 5,000, were somehow moved, somehow transformed to see and experience the world differently in that moment? What Where they once saw strangers, they now saw fellow humans with needs and hunger pangs just like their own? What if where they once saw potential threat, they now saw commonality and community? What if where they once saw reason to fear, they now saw an opportunity to love and for love to grow? What if where they once only saw scarcity, they now saw abundance? What if those who maybe brought a little bit of food with them when they left their towns by foot were now moved deep inside because of what they saw in Jesus, and the disciples moved to compassionately share that which they brought with them so that everyone would now have more than enough? What if? Well, because of this miracle, because they shared their lunch, all ate and were filled, and there were 12 baskets of more than enough left over. What if, indeed? The transformation of hearts, of minds, of eyes, of spirits led to everyone having their needs met on that day on the shore of the lake. Everyone gathered, participated in the miracle, feeding more than 5,000. Now, friends, that's a miracle with lasting effects. And perhaps that is why the story is told in each of the 4 Gospels. And participation in that ongoing miracle is what I believe we've all been called toward. It's what we witness in the life, the teachings, the work of Jesus. And at its best, it's what we experience in the lives of those who follow the way of Jesus in our own lives. Friends, this story reminds us that there is enough. There's always enough. But in order for it to reach everyone, those who have need, we need a miracle. A miracle where hearts and minds and eyes and spirits are transformed, changed deep within, moved with compassion to share our lunch, our resources, our energy, our time, our lives, our very selves with others, even when it's risky. And even when many think it's impossible. This is the call and the example of the transformative power of the Spirit of the Christ. So today, here on Ralston Commons, may our lives be transformed. And may we continue to bear witness to the miracle when more than 5,000 people were fed because a simple lunch of 5 loaves and 2 fish were shared, which then led to others sharing their own lunch. Friends, there is always enough, more than enough to share. To God be the glory. Amen.